We can't just give her that much, Walter. It's an investment, not a charity, my mother, Patricia Clark, hissed, the sound thin and sharp, slicing through the thin drywall of the utility closet. I was supposed to be retrieving the dusty box of ceramic angels, but my hands froze on the latch. I could hear their voices clearly just feet away in the hallway, unaware I was pressed against the cold concrete floor. Marcus needs the best, his future is secure. He has vision. Natalie? She'll just drop out or marry some boy the moment she leaves the county. It's a waste of $40,000. She's simply not worth the risk. The oxygen vanished from the air. Not worth the risk. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fundamental evaluation of my worth as a human being, decided in a casual, cruel sentence. The glass ornament box slipped from my numb fingers, scattering tiny shards across the floor, but the sound was muffled by the thick rug in the hall. They continued their discussion about the new BMW Marcus needed for his networking. I pressed my forehead against the wall, trying to absorb the shock. My parents, the people who were supposed to be my safety net, had just publicly disinherited my future, prioritizing a volatile investment in their golden boy over my guaranteed academic success. The anger wasn't hot. It was a deep, freezing cold that settled in my bones. I didn't breathe. I just listened to the sound of my life being casually dismissed and reorganized around my brother's needs. The pain was so intense it felt like a physical blow to the stomach, leaving me breathless and dizzy. I stayed crouched in the dark utility closet, the scent of mildew and old cardboard filling my nostrils, grounding me. They had been planning this for months, I realized. All the subtle hints, the avoidance of college applications talk, the sudden focus on Marcus's potential. It was all a calculated strategy to save the money they needed to burn on his doomed ventures. The realization hit me. I was 18, capable and smart, but in their eyes I was a consumable resource, not a person deserving of independent investment. I slowly stood up, brushing the dust from my clothes. The girl who desperately sought their approval, who believed that if she just worked hard enough she would finally be seen, was gone. She was replaced by something hard and focused. This was the moment of transformation. I looked down at the shattered Christmas ornaments, glittering like tiny, broken promises. I knew exactly what I had to do. This wasn't going to be a screaming match or a tearful confrontation. That would be too easy for them to dismiss. This was going to be something much longer, much colder. This is my story. My parents refused to support my education, so I walked away and never looked back. My name is Natalie Clark. And I walked out of that utility closet a stranger to the family waiting in the living room. I forced my lips into a wide, cheerful smile, a mask of absolute compliance. Mom, Dad, I chirped, stepping into the warm, scented air of the living room. Did you decide about the Christmas bonus for Marcus? That new business venture sounds amazing. I'm sure he'll be a huge success. Their faces immediately relaxed. They hadn't suspected a thing. They looked at me with that patronizing affection reserved for pets and children who are seen but not truly acknowledged. Walter Clark leaned back in his leather armchair, puffing out his chest. We're sorting out the financing, sweetheart. It's a huge commitment, but Marcus is worth it. Patricia added, we're cutting back on non-essentials this year, but it's all for the family's future, Natalie. I nodded sincerely, absorbing the casual cruelty of their words. They were telling me straight to my face that I was a non-essential. I played my role perfectly, asking Marcus about the projected revenue and admiring his completely impractical business plan. I let them believe I was the naive, supportive sister, the one who would always stay, always support, always be second place. They were so blinded by their own self-congratulatory narrative of parental sacrifice that they couldn't see the ice forming in my eyes. I was already planning my escape, every word of praise I offered them tasting like ash in my mouth. The favoritism had always been the background noise of my life, but I'd always rationalized it as Marcus needing more help. He was the chaotic one. I was the responsible one. Now I saw their definition of responsible was simply low maintenance. I flashed back to 2 years prior. Marcus had crashed his beat-up sedan after flunking his first semester of community college, a $50,000 tuition investment they had already paid for. The very next week he drove home a brand new bright red Mustang. He needs a reliable vehicle for his future endeavors, Walter had declared proudly at the dinner table. When I asked for a loan to cover the fee for my AP Literature exam, I was told to find a part-time job, Learning the value of money is important, Natalie. I ended up getting a used textbook and working double shifts at the local diner to cover the fee. Every birthday, every holiday, their praise for Marcus was a spotlight. Their acknowledgement of me was a footnote, a casual, distracted pat on the head. They saw him as the golden investment, the family legacy they could boast about at country club dinners. I was just the reliable backup, the one who didn't need the money because I was responsible. I realize now that my responsibility was just an excuse for their neglect, a license to ignore my needs entirely. That night, watching them fawn over Marcus's grandiose, doomed plans, the final cold clarity struck me. I didn't need their help, but I absolutely needed to be free of their expectations. I spent the rest of the evening moving through the motions of the perfect daughter, helping Patricia clean up, listening to Walter pontificate about the stock market, all while my brain was running logistical calculations. I couldn't afford to wait until the morning. They might try to talk sense into me or worse, try to control my decision. I needed distance immediately. I waited until 3 a.m., when the house was silent and the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I packed one suitcase, clothes, my laptop, and essential documents. I didn't take anything sentimental. Sentiment was a weakness I couldn't afford anymore. I emptied my small savings account, $800 earned through 2 years of waitressing, transferring it instantly to a new separate bank account they didn't know about. I left a single folded note on the kitchen counter, resting it against the coffee maker. It wasn't accusatory, it was final. I've decided to take a gap year and travel. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. No farewell, no explanation, no room for negotiation. I slipped out the back door, the cold December air hitting my face like a slap. I drove the old Ford Focus I had bought myself with my own money 3 states away, not stopping until the sun rose over a roadside diner in Ohio. The silence of the morning street was louder than any confrontation could have been, and for the first time, I felt truly, terrifyingly, and wonderfully free. I didn't stop driving until I hit Columbus. I needed to be far enough away that they couldn't easily track me down, but close enough to a major city to find work. I checked into the cheapest, shadiest motel I could find, the kind where the carpet stuck to your shoes and the air smelled perpetually of stale smoke. My $800 was evaporating quickly. I needed a job now. I spent 3 days relentlessly applying everywhere, lying about my age, claiming I was 20, and inventing a short, impressive work history. I finally landed a position as a receptionist at Atlas Global, a massive cutthroat logistics firm. The building was a brutalist monument of gray concrete. The hours were brutal, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and the pay was minimum wage plus a meager health plan. It was the antithesis of the cushy college life my peers were starting, but every time I swiped my key card I felt a surge of autonomy. I was earning my existence. My first paycheck, though barely enough to cover rent on my tiny shared studio apartment and ramen, felt like $1 million. It was mine, completely untainted by their judgment or conditional support. It proved definitively that I didn't need their charity, their approval, or their money to survive. The memory of Patricia's voice, "Not worth the risk," was the only motivational poster I needed taped above my makeshift desk. I quickly realized that answering phones and sorting mail wasn't going to get me anywhere near the life I needed to build. The corporate ladder at Atlas Global was steep, but the first few rungs were within reach if you were observant. So I stopped being just a receptionist. I became a sponge. I sat at the front desk, but my ears were always tuned to the executive floor. I listened to the phone calls of the mid-level managers, memorized the names of key clients, and started taking notes on the flow of the business. I studied the industry jargon, LTL, intermodal freight, last-mile delivery, during my mandated 30-minute lunch breaks, eating sad microwave meals while reading dense reports I found abandoned in the recycling bin. I watched the analysts and strategists, noting their habits, their weaknesses, and their strengths. I learned more about supply chain efficiency and corporate finance in 6 months of rigorous self-study and observation than Marcus would learn in 4 years of paying someone to give him a piece of paper. I was the silent observer, cataloging the company's weaknesses and strengths, preparing my dossier for the moment I could strike. I knew my lack of a degree was a liability, but my practical on-the-job knowledge would soon become my greatest asset. 6 months into my new life, just as I was starting to feel marginally stable, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. Hello. A moment of silence, then Patricia's voice, sounding strained and laced with forced concern. Natalie, it's Mom. We're worried. We need to know you're safe. Are you still traveling? You haven't called. The immediate memory of the utility closet conversation, the $40,000 they had deemed too precious for me, made my grip on the phone tighten until my knuckles were white. The concern wasn't about me. It was about their image, their narrative of the perfect family. They were worried I might inconvenience them. I took a deep, steadying breath, my voice flat and emotionless. I'm fine, Mom. I'm busy. I have a job. I'm safe. She started to ask where I was, her voice rising in panic. We just want to know where you are. We want to help, she insisted. You already made your choice about helping me, I whispered, barely loud enough for her to hear before forcing myself to cut the connection. I have to go. I hung up before she could ask where I was or, more importantly, why I hadn't come crawling back yet, desperate for money. I had successfully established the boundary. I was gone and they no longer had access to my life or my emotions. The call left me shaken but reinforced my resolve. I spotted an internal posting a month later. Executive Assistant to the Director of Global Strategy. It was a massive leap from the front desk, but the director, a sharp woman named Ms. Reyes, was known for promoting strictly on merit. I tailored my resume, emphasizing my perfect attendance, my fluency with the internal tracking software, and my self-taught knowledge of regional freight costs. I nailed the interview. I demonstrated knowledge that stunned Reyes, casually dropping complex terms and suggesting improvements to the current filing system. I felt the job was mine. But 2 days later, Reyes apologized, looking genuinely frustrated. I'm sorry, Natalie. The CEO's nephew Ken needed a place to land. Corporate mandated the hire. The familiar, bitter sting of unfairness returned, but this time it didn't paralyze me. This time I saw an opportunity. I didn't quit. I marched straight into Ms. Reyes's office, bypassing the awkward new executive assistant Ken, who was busy scrolling through social media. I proposed a deal that would be impossible to refuse. Ms. Reyes, I began, standing rigidly in front of her desk. I understand corporate politics, but Ken won't last a month doing the actual work. He's unqualified for the financial oversight required in this role. Reyes leaned back, skeptical. And your point, Clark? I laid out my offer, my voice steady. Give Ken the title but give me the work. I will handle all the complex financial reconciliation reports, the budgeting and the data analysis, the parts Ken will inevitably screw up. I will do it for my current receptionist pay for 6 months. In return, you change my title from receptionist to administrative analyst. Give me the experience and I will give you flawless, indispensable work. Reyes's eyes narrowed, then a slow, calculating smile spread across her face. She saw the desperation but she also saw the dedication. She smirked and agreed, assuming I'd fail or burn out. The free work was my university. I taught myself advanced Excel modeling, pivot tables, and auditing principles using every free online resource and library book I could find. I was working 16-hour days, driven by the memory of Patricia's voice declaring my worthlessness. I spent 3 grueling months immersed in Atlas Global's financial data. Ken, the CEO's nephew, was predictably useless, spending his days ordering expensive lunches and taking long breaks. Meanwhile, I was quietly discovering a massive, costly inefficiency in their regional shipping contracts, an oversight that had been bleeding the company dry for years. It was a complex web of outdated contracts and preferential vendor treatment. I compiled the data meticulously, creating a single comprehensive report that was impossible to ignore. I worked until 2 a.m. every night, fueled by instant coffee and the memory of Patricia's voice declaring my worthlessness. I wasn't just doing my job, I was building my fortress of competence, brick by excruciating brick. When the report was finished, I requested 5 minutes with the CEO, Mr. Sterling, bypassing Reyes entirely. A calculated risk that paid off because Sterling was a man who respected audacity. I didn't complain about Ken or my unfair pay. I simply presented the data. I showed him how my proposed routing changes and vendor renegotiations would save Atlas Global $1.2 million annually, effective immediately. Mr. Sterling, a man legendary for his impatience, leaned forward, his expression shifting from bored skepticism to focused respect within 3 slides. He didn't ask about my degree. He didn't ask about my background. He only asked one question: why didn't anyone else see this? They weren't looking hard enough, sir, I replied simply. He didn't hesitate. He ripped up Ken's contract right there, sending the shredder into a furious whir. You're off the desk, Clark. You're in logistics strategy. Effective immediately. You report directly to Reyes, but you answer to me. The promotion came with a significant salary bump, a corner office, small but mine, and a new wardrobe. I traded in the ill-fitting receptionist uniform and the worn, discount store shirts for sharp, tailored suits, a uniform of respectability and power. I changed my phone number, permanently deleted my old social media presence, and adopted a professional distance that shielded my heart from any future emotional attacks. The transformation was complete. Natalie Clark, the discarded daughter, was dead. Natalie Clark, the rising corporate strategist, was born. The power had shifted and I was holding the lever. 3 years passed in a blur of late nights, complex deals, and steady promotions. I was 22, managing a small but critical regional operations team, and my bank account was a testament to my tireless work ethic. I was successful, but the emotional wound remained, cauterized by ambition. Then the past intruded. I received an email forwarded from an old high school acquaintance. A mass update from Patricia, clearly sent to impress the local community. It was a glowing, self-congratulatory announcement about Marcus's new groundbreaking tech startup, Summit Solutions, complete with glossy, professional photos of him in a borrowed suit, shaking hands with local dignitaries. The email boasted about the significant family investment, and ended with a passive-aggressive line: "We pray Natalie finds her path soon wherever she may be." I deleted the email immediately, but the name Summit Solutions stuck in my mind. The old resentment flared, sharp and cold. They were still pouring resources into a failure, while still pitying my hard-earned success. My professional curiosity, or perhaps my simmering desire for justice, compelled me to act. I used my company resources, anonymously of course, to run a quick background check on Marcus's company. The results were darkly satisfying. Summit Solutions was highly leveraged, financed primarily by a massive $500,000 loan secured by personal assets. I cross-referenced the property records. The collateral was Patricia and Walter's house. My gut tightened, not in fear but in recognition of their staggering recklessness. Marcus was burning through the capital at an alarming rate, spending on lavish office spaces, flashy marketing campaigns, and expensive cars, not actual product development. They hadn't just invested the $40,000 they withheld from me. They had bet their entire retirement, their security, their future on their son's arrogance and lack of business acumen. They had tied their fate to a sinking ship, convinced that their blood relative was too special to fail. I felt a chill of anticipation. This wasn't about me seeking them out. This was about waiting for the natural, devastating consequences of their own poor judgment to catch up to them. The inevitable next step happened 6 months later. I was attending a major industry conference in Chicago, scouting potential vendors for Atlas Global. I walked into the main exhibition hall, adjusting my tailored blazer, and froze. Across the crowded room, near a small, pathetic-looking booth, was Walter Clark. He looked stressed, older, and deeply uncomfortable. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit that looked like it had been bought off a rack at a discount store, and he was desperately trying to talk up the features of Marcus's failing software to a disinterested vendor. He was clearly doing sales for Summit Solutions. He looked defeated, his usual pompous air replaced by a desperate energy. I ducked instantly behind a massive, brightly colored display, watching him through the gaps in the signage. He was hustling, pleading, his body language screaming financial anxiety. I felt a sudden brief flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by the vivid memory of him agreeing with Patricia that I wasn't worth the investment. He was now paying the price for his own investment choices, forced to humiliate himself to keep his son's vanity project afloat. I didn't approach him. I didn't want him to know I was there, successful and thriving. I simply observed the decay of their supposed stability and walked away, back to my VIP lounge, stronger and more resolved than ever. The corporate machine continued to churn, and I was an integral part of it. My boss tasked me with identifying struggling local logistics firms we could acquire cheaply to eliminate regional competition and absorb their client lists. We called it the vulture strategy. I pulled up the list of financially distressed companies in the Midwest region. Right there, near the bottom, was a small, failing logistics software company called Apex Dynamics. They were deeply in debt and facing multiple lawsuits from small local creditors. I paused, feeling a cold, strategic thrill. I dug deeper into Apex Dynamics' financials. Their primary lender wasn't a national bank. It was the same local credit union that had financed Marcus's Summit Solutions $500,000 loan. The connection was undeniable. I realized that if Apex Dynamics went under, the massive loss would destabilize the credit union, which would in turn put severe, immediate pressure on Marcus's highly leveraged loan. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying, beautiful precision. My path to revenge wasn't through a dramatic confrontation. It was through the cold, ethical, and entirely legal machinations of the corporate economy they had foolishly entered. I began to draft my acquisition proposal. The proposal I presented to Mr. Sterling was airtight. It was framed purely as a defensive maneuver. Acquiring Apex Dynamics cheaply would protect Atlas Global's regional market share from competitors who might try to buy them out. I emphasized the low cost and high potential for client absorption. I didn't mention the financial instability of their credit union, but I highlighted the urgency of the deal. If we don't act now, sir, someone else will, and they will gain a significant foothold in the region. My boss loved the aggressive, low-cost approach. Clark, this is brilliant. We'll bankrupt them and pick up the scraps. Execute the deal. My next step was to negotiate with the credit union holding Apex's debt. This was the critical leverage point. I understood the financial pain Apex was causing the bank, and I knew that pain was mirrored by Marcus's failing startup. I prepared for the meeting with the precision of a surgeon, knowing I was about to apply pressure exactly where it would hurt the most. I was playing a game of corporate dominoes, and the Clarks were unknowingly standing at the end of the line. The negotiation meeting was set in a sterile, windowless conference room. The lead negotiator for the credit union was a man named Mr. Thompson, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was clearly under immense stress. I was polite, professional, and utterly ruthless. We discussed the Apex Dynamics debt, and Thompson confessed, sighing heavily, that they were overloaded with bad loans, specifically mentioning a high-risk tech startup that was bleeding them dry and making the auditors nervous. He was talking about Marcus, but I kept my face impassive. I offered a ridiculously low-ball price for Apex Dynamics' assets, knowing he was desperate. Thompson tried to haggle, clutching at straws, trying to salvage something respectable from the disaster. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm, citing every public failure of Apex Dynamics. I made sure to mention the impending regulatory audits for institutions carrying too much high-risk debt. Mr. Thompson, I said, my gaze steady. You know what happens if you hold on to Apex any longer. You'll be forced to liquidate at a massive loss, which will trigger an internal review of all your high-risk investments. I paused, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. I didn't need to mention Summit Solutions. He knew exactly which high-risk investment I meant, the one secured by the residential property of the Clarks. Take our offer now. It's clean, it's immediate, and it allows you to close the books on this mess without attracting further scrutiny to your other, more volatile clients. I was offering him a way to hide the full extent of the damage, but only if he accepted my terms. The pressure was enormous. He was caught between taking a small, immediate loss on Apex, or risking a catastrophic public collapse of his entire high-risk portfolio, including Marcus's venture. His face crumpled. He knew he was beaten. He signed the papers, accepting the lowball offer. The domino had been pushed. Atlas Global officially secured the acquisition of Apex Dynamics. The news hit the local business papers, detailing the credit union's significant loss on the deal. The financial hit, though contained, was enough to trigger the internal review I had predicted. The bank's board immediately demanded a full audit of all outstanding high-risk loans to mitigate further damage. The pressure on Marcus's Summit Solutions loan mounted exponentially. They had lost their buffer. I was sitting in a quarterly strategy meeting discussing our next regional target, when I saw a news alert flash across my tablet screen. Local credit union freezes funds pending review of Summit Solutions assets. CO cites need for fiscal responsibility. I felt a deep, profound satisfaction. My actions, purely professional and strategically sound for Atlas Global, had triggered the exact predictable consequence for their negligence. It was pure poetic justice. I had simply waited for them to build their own gallows, and then I provided the final gentle nudge. The clock was ticking down for Marcus. He needed emergency bridging capital, and he needed it fast before the bank pulled the plug entirely. In a desperate, arrogant move, he reached out to Atlas Global, the biggest player in the region, hoping to sell a small software component to my division to buy himself a few weeks of time. The proposal, forwarded by my assistant, landed on my desk with a thud. I stared at the name Marcus Clark, CEO, Summit Solutions, printed neatly on the cover sheet. This was the moment. The final direct intersection of our paths. I ran a quick technical assessment. The software component he was trying to offload was mediocre, overpriced, and completely unnecessary for our operations. It was a clear attempt to bail water out of a sinking ship. He had come begging to the very company whose strategic expansion had destabilized his finances. The irony was exquisite. I sat in my office, the proposal spread out on the massive mahogany desk, watching the city lights twinkle below. I didn't feel rage or excitement. I felt a cold, clear certainty. This wasn't personal revenge. This was a professional decision. Marcus's proposal was bad business. If I approved it, I would be wasting company resources, the very thing I had dedicated my entire career to preventing. I picked up my pen and wrote a single line across the top of the memo, using my official corporate stamp. Deny. No strategic value. Recommend immediate termination of all vendor discussions. I signed it, my signature sharp and authoritative, and sent the rejection down the chain of command. It was clean, concise, and devastatingly final. I had effectively shut the door on his last hope, not out of malice but out of professional duty. He never knew that the VP who rejected his plea was the sister he and his parents had dismissed as worthless. A few weeks later, the final, inevitable news arrived. I received an anonymous email, likely from the same well-meaning acquaintance, with a link to a local public notice. Summit Solutions had officially defaulted on its loan. Because Patricia and Walter had personally guaranteed the initial capital, they were now facing foreclosure proceedings on the Clark family home. I read the details, confirming the timeline and the financial figures. They hadn't just lost the money I needed for college. They had lost everything trying to prop up the colossal failure they cherished. Their arrogance, their belief that their son was entitled to success regardless of his competence, had destroyed the foundation of their lives. They had paid the ultimate price for valuing me at zero. I didn't feel elation but a profound, quiet sense of justice. They had faced the natural, devastating consequences of their own choices, amplified by the very system they believed was rigged in their favor. I drove past the Clark house late one Saturday afternoon. I parked my company car, a sleek, black sedan with tinted windows, a block away. A for sale sign stood crookedly in the manicured front yard. I saw Patricia and Walter loading tattered cardboard boxes into a beat-up U-Haul truck parked haphazardly in the driveway. They looked utterly defeated, their faces etched with stress and regret. Patricia's hair was messy, Walter's shoulders were slumped. They didn't see me. I was just another car driving by. I was a ghost to them, a memory they had successfully erased. They were focused only on their loss, their failure, and the humiliation of moving out of the house they had prioritized over their daughter's future. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to gloat. The scene itself was the ultimate confirmation that the transaction was complete. They had paid the price not to me but to the reality they had tried to deny. I watched until the U-Haul pulled away and then I put my car in gear. I left the suburban street behind, feeling a sense of absolute, unburdened closure. It has been 5 years since I drove away from that house. I am now Vice President of Operations for Atlas Global, with a salary that dwarfs the cost of any college education I might have pursued. I bought a penthouse apartment overlooking the financial district, a view earned entirely by my own merit, not by their conditional love. I used my resources to set up a private, anonymous scholarship fund for ambitious students who face financial barriers. I called it the Worth the Risk Fund. I never contacted the Clarks again and they never contacted me. They no longer existed in my world. My revenge wasn't cruelty, it was competence. It was proving that the worth they denied me was real, quantifiable, and unstoppable. I didn't just survive, I thrived, building a life of immense value and integrity. I learned the most valuable lesson of all. You don't need permission to build the life you deserve. The silence where they used to be is the most beautiful sound in the world.